Hey everybody, I'm Ronnie. This is Dicey Rolls. I wanted to elaborate a little bit on something I kind of mentioned or thought about for the Session Zero kind of background of this Dread Sentinels campaign, and it's like a DoT mechanic. So I know there's a lot of back and forth between RPG games that went from tabletop to computer, and there's a little bit of kind of ebb and flow, I think, back and forth between them, but this I found to be a really easy way to add a little bit of pressure in a suspenseful way. There's this kind of looming knowledge that this damage is coming, but it kind of gives the players a way to deal with it as a team also. And it really, for me, the sweetest thing is it doesn't involve tracking or a lot of keeping things down on paper and crunching more and more numbers. A lot of it is just tracked visually and intuitively, and I use these little clear plastic cups. So the way that I do it is I have kind of a pool, and I'm using these red dice here for like a bleeding mechanic. And so I will call each one of the die a stack of bleeding. I think you could easily apply this to a lot of different things. If you get these little Chessex stacks of dice that are different colors, you get a bunch of green ones, you could do like a poison thing. Blue, I'm thinking is cold or frozen ice kind of thing. And if the red is bleeding, I tried to figure out something else for burning, so orange seemed like a good one for that. But the way that it works is if a monster has an attack that deals damage, it'll do some damage, and then it will also inflict like maybe 2 stacks of bleeding, or even just 1 stack of bleeding. So if a player takes a few hits, every time they get hit, I'll give them that regular damage, and then I'll say, okay, and you've got 3 stacks of bleeding, so they'll kind of put their cup out and I'll toss those in. Don't have to keep track of it, you just kind of visually have it right there in front of you. And the thing is, at the beginning of your turn, before your character takes their turn, you've got to dump them out or roll them, and that's the damage you take from bleeding, and then one of them goes away. So it's lingering, it will kind of step down each turn if nothing is done about it, but you're going to be losing health. And the other thing is it really ramps up. 3 dice you might not be worried about, but even just 4 or 5, that's going to be a roll of 5, and then a roll of 4, and then a roll of 3. So it is an easy way for me to apply some pressure without just having all that damage come at once. The way that I've also worked it, which I think has really helped encourage like teamwork, not that they weren't doing that, but it really lends itself to that, is healing spells. I treat every healing spell as though the level of the spell, that level is how many stacks it will remove when you heal. So if somebody has like 4 stacks of bleeding on and they get healed, and somebody uses a level 2 healing word on them, 2 of those stacks are going to come off before they get to their turn and have to roll all that damage, which is a huge relief, and that just comes back to the pool. And on top of that, they're also healed up a little bit, so they're a little less worried about taking damage from the 2. Or if you have players that are very tactically minded, they're going to figure out a way to deal very quickly with all of their stacks and clean all the stacks off of players as quick as they can. The other thing that I feel like makes this easy to track, I've done this a little bit, is you can kind of mix and match, and the colors of the dice will keep it separate. So if somebody has 3 stacks of bleeding and 2 stacks of burning, and they get that same level 2 healing word, the way I'm treating it is that it pulls 2 stacks of bleeding and 2 stacks of burning off of that character, which really gives a buff to healing, or it make a character. Some people who love, like I love playing clerics, I love like playing healing support characters, that makes you feel so much more powerful to help your team and your friends when that kind of thing comes on. Somebody's just going to be stressing about if they're going to stay up when their turn comes, and you even just hit them with a little spell like Healing Word and you can really turn it around. It makes it feel like it gives you that supportive cleric healing kind of flavor that some people really like. If you choose to run this, I would just say be really careful about piling on a lot of damage. You can easily swamp some players, especially if they're lower level. These guys started playing this when I introduced this mechanic. Where they were at in the scheme of things was like level, I want to say like 7 or 8. So they had some really good ways of dealing with the damage, and they had access to some really good healing spells. If you were starting out at like level 1, I would say you pretty much, you're gonna kill somebody's character off unless it's just like a boss monster that has like an attack that adds 1 stack of bleeding. And even then, you're probably hoping that they get to that after they've leveled up at least to like level 2 or something. So just kind of be careful with that if they're I think lower level. But once they're getting to be 3rd, 4th, 5th level, I think it's kind of easy to add a bunch of monsters that'll have 1 stack of bleeding with their attacks. Another point, the way that I've treated it too, is as though crits deal double the stacks. So that can add up real quick too. If you have a bunch of monsters that have 3 stacks of bleeding attacks, boy, if they take a crit and a couple of hits, it's going to be like 9, 10, 11 stacks, and that'll be tough to deal with. So I think having a little bit of a cushion in level is kind of important for the players, because it gives them some space, some time in their hit point pool to be able to figure out, like as a team, how they're going to deal with that if somebody really takes a lot of damage. The other thing that I think is a really good idea that I'm planning on incorporating in the future, like I said, with the blue being stacks of cold, I feel like it's maybe for our group it would not be, I don't think, as fun, or it just would be a little bit too brutal to be completely frozen by an attack immediately outright, kind of like a save or suck spell. But I really like the idea of every stack of freezing that you take, it's reducing your movement by 5 feet. So it's not that all of a sudden you get hit with it and you can't do anything, but it's bogging you down and slowing you down, and you can't get to enemies as fast, and you can't get to your allies as fast. I think that would be a fun way to run like an ice or frozen mechanic. The poison mechanic too, if you have, maybe you could do it not just per dice, but if you have any stacks of poison, you're taking 1 action on your turn. You're sick and you're retching and you can't function like you normally can. The burning, I don't think there's like any secondary mechanics like that need to go to it. But I thought those are some fun ideas. I bet a lot of DMs out there getting ideas in their head with that kind of thing, because I just found it so easy. You're tracking it visually. It's not another thing you have to put down on paper. And like I said, it really felt like it brought out the teamwork between the characters. So that made the combats a little bit more fun, I think, for everybody. I think running through an example would be really helpful, because there's a lot of things in play with this, but they all come together to make it really smooth. At least I find it pretty simple. Let's say that this is the party with a bard, a druid, and a paladin. And so these would each be their respective pools where they would keep track of these stacks of bleeding, burning, poison, whatever mechanic you want to run. Let's say that the druid and the paladin took some hits. Let's say they were kind of up in the front, and the paladin has 4 and the druid has 3 stacks of bleeding. When their turn comes around, if you run the side initiative, I've been really enjoying the side initiative, especially with how it plays into this mechanic. I let the team go in whatever order they want. This is where the bard being able to do a healing word and take stacks off of either one would be helpful. It also makes a spell like Mass Cure Wounds feel like it's worth it for being a higher level spell. I think Mass Cure Wounds is like level 5 or something, and for the amount of hit points each individual gets out of it, it feels like a little bit of a weak heal. But if you've got a whole group that took a bunch of stacks and you're taking a level 5 spell, you're taking 5 stacks off of each one. If you love playing that support healer, you're gonna feel like a god. It's gonna be sweet with your team. Let's say that the bard casts a second level healing word, and he takes 2 stacks off of the paladin. He didn't have to take any stacks at the beginning of his turn because he doesn't have any. But then let's say the paladin decides to go next because now he's healed up a little bit from the attacks that he did take, and he's only got 2. So before he does anything, he'll take his bleeding stacks, roll them. So he took 4 points from his bleeding. He's going to discard 1 and keep the rest. That'll go back into the pool. He's probably feeling pretty good. That's not a big deal. The other thing that's maybe worth mentioning why I wanted to run this as an example is because there are a lot of other sources of healing just besides the spells. There's the lay on hands that the paladin has, there are healing potions, and what I kind of decided to do just as a benchmark to kind of equate or relate to the levels of spells taking off stacks was to say that every time 10 points of lay on hands was used on somebody, it took a stack off. And the levels of healing spells that are like regular, greater, superior, supreme, I think, I treated them just as level 1, 2, 3, 4. So depending on what level of healing potion you took, that's what stacks came off for you. So maybe the paladin doesn't want to use spells, but he has 20 points of lay on hands. He could lay on hands for the druid. The druid loses 2 stacks. They come off before his turn even comes up. That way when the druid goes, he just has 1 to roll, 2. Well, 2s are hot. Discards 1. There aren't any more left. So the druid's free to do whatever he wants that round, and he's all taken care of. So hopefully that kind of helps things make a little bit of sense. The other thing is like thinking about the mechanics. The other reason why this seems like it really helps for higher level characters because they can deal with this. An average roll on a d6 is only going to be 3.5 points of damage, but it's going to look gnarly if you've got like 5-6 stacks in your cup when your turn's coming around. And instead of the players all being able to just gang up and just pour damage onto a single monster, and you're kind of stuck in that bullet sponge trap of how do I make something that's kind of a challenge but still combat without just playing with these numbers so much. When this is going on, the players, several times the players have even kind of commented, somebody's working on healing, managing these stacks, and they need to figure out who's going to do damage and who's going to do healing on the turn. So it kind of takes a little bit of pressure. They have to pay attention to this. It takes a little bit of pressure off of having a monster that has just tons of hit points or high AC, that kind of thing. And it makes them feel like, I feel like, it makes them work as a team. They're not just thinking about what damage they're going to do to a monster and just spiking something. They're having to make sure the rest of their teammates stay up and deal with these stacks. And that would be especially so if you ran one, like I was saying, if you ran frozen stacks where it's reducing their movement. What if they had to either get away from something, or a stairway or a walkway is crumbling? They would have to be dealing with that, maybe even during a combat encounter or something, while they're trying to move. That would be a fun tension, I think, to have for an encounter. So I hope that gives everybody some ideas, and that as an example helps you understand how I run it. It's pretty simple. The biggest thing is that you roll your stacks at the beginning of your turn. You discard 1 from each different type of stack that you have. So if you had poison and bleeding, you would discard one from poison and bleeding. And then just equating, thinking about in your games, if you have different ways of healing that aren't just the spells, figure out what you're going to treat as equating a level of a spell taking off a stack.